At 55, the tragedy of Catherine Zeta-Jones is beyond heartbreaking. She wasn't merely a movie star. She was cinematic royalty, velvet-gloved power, and vintage elegance set on fire. Chicago didn't just crown her, it carved her into memory's scarlet lips, razor-sharp choreography, thunder in the eyes. But the woman behind the lights bled in silence. Long before Oscar Gold, there was a scalpel and a prayer, a toddler in Swansea throat, opened by an emergency tracheotomy so she could breathe again. The faint mark beneath her chin is more than a scar, it is a signature of survival. From church hall stages to the West End, from humiliation in early film, failures to the swordwork of The Mask of Zorro, she did not arrive. She fought her way into frame. Then came the fairy tale headline, Romance with Michael Douglas, and the cost no headline could total. While the world swooned, storms gathered. A stepson imprisoned a diagnosis that shook their home interviews, that ignited cruel speculation, and Catherine's own invisible battle, bipolar II disorder, turning triumphs into tightropes. She learned the hardest choreography of all, smiling for cameras while rebuilding in the dark. Checking into treatment, quietly speaking about mental health. Loudly, she became a beacon to strangers while holding her family together, piece by fragile piece. Separation, rumors, reconciliations, fresh accusations from the wider world, every season pressed harder on the same bruise. Yet she kept working, kept mothering, kept moving, kept breathing. This is not a tale of perfection, but of endurance. Not a crown, but the neck that learned to carry it. If you ever felt her electricity on screen, know this: it was sparked by friction, by grit, by a lifetime of choosing to rise when the script begged collapse. The spotlight made her luminous. The shadows made her legendary. But the darkest secret was yet to be revealed. At 55, the tragedy of Catherine Zeta-Jones is beyond heartbreaking. She wasn't merely a movie star, she was cinematic royalty. A woman who didn't just walk into Hollywood, she burned through it. With the grace of old cinema and the ferocity of something utterly modern, she made us believe that elegance could have an edge. But behind those red carpet smiles, behind that diamond composure, there's a scar, small, pale, almost hidden, the mark of a tracheotomy that once kept a gasping child alive. Before the Oscars, before Chicago, before the headlines, there was a little girl in Swansea, her throat cut open so she could breathe. That scar never vanished. It simply learned to hide beneath silk spotlight and survival. And maybe that's what made her luminous, not beauty, but endurance. Because every frame we adored was built over pain that never healed. From West End stages to The Mask of Zorro, she didn't rise by luck. She clawed her way up from the dark. Then, at the peak of her fame, when the world bowed to her brilliance, Catherine faced something no applause could drown out: the quiet storm of bipolar disorder, the loneliness of loving a legend, and the price of being the light everyone looks to. So, before we go further, take a moment, not for the star, but for the survivor. Hit that like, not out of sympathy, but out of recognition. Because this story isn't just hers, it's every story that begins with a scar and ends with survival. But the darkest chapter of her journey is only just beginning. Catherine Zeta-Jones was never meant to blend in. From the moment she first appeared on screen, it was as if Hollywood itself paused, caught between admiration and disbelief. The old world of cinema, with its silver screen goddesses and impossible poise, seemed to have returned in her face, in her voice, in the way she carried silence like dialogue. She reminded audiences of something they'd forgotten: that true glamour is not loud, it's dangerous. Before Chicago, before the Oscars and magazine covers, Catherine had already lived a dozen lives in one body. She was the daughter of a baker and a seamstress, raised on the damp winds of Swansea, a seaside town where dreams usually rusted before they reached the harbor. Yet even there, something in her shimmered. Her teachers said she moved as if music followed her. Her neighbors said she had that look, the kind that both tempts fate and defies it. By her teens, she was performing on the West End, holding her own against veterans twice her age. But fame is never as generous as it appears. Behind every standing ovation was a child who'd skipped childhood, a young woman who'd learned too early that applause fades faster than exhaustion. The world would later call her lucky. In truth, she was relentless. Then came the alchemy of the 1990s Hollywood, rediscovering its appetite for beauty with Bite. When Catherine crossed the Atlantic, casting directors saw a face too perfect to be taken seriously. She saw a challenge. With The Mask of Zorro, she didn't just act, she detonated. Critics said she resurrected the lost art of movie stardom, the kind that could make time itself slow down. But even then, few noticed how hard she fought to stay upright beneath the weight of her own success. For while the world was falling in love with Catherine Zeta-Jones, the icon Catherine the woman was quietly unraveling under pressure no spotlight could soothe. The more the public adored her, the more invisible she became to herself. Marriage, motherhood, fame, each came gilded with expectation, each cut deeper than the last. And yet, she never stopped performing not just on screen, but in life. She smiled through breakdowns, posed through panic attacks, and raised her children while battling the invisible currents of bipolar disorder. Years later, she would say, "The hardest role I ever played was myself." Her story is not the kind told in gossip columns. It's the one whispered in quiet rooms when the applause has died and the lights have cooled. It is a love letter to resilience, written in the language of scars and second chances. If you've ever stood in front of your own mirror and wondered how much longer you can keep it together, stay. This isn't just a Hollywood story, it's a human one. Because before the pain, before the headlines, before she became an emblem of grace under siege, Catherine Zeta-Jones was just a girl who refused to let circumstance write her ending. And the child who once fought for breath was about to fight for her destiny. Before the diamonds, before the fame, there was a small kitchen in Swansea that smelled of sugar bread and quiet hope. Catherine Zeta-Jones was born on September 25, 1969, the daughter of a baker and a seamstress who knew more about hard work than luxury. Her father David woke before dawn every day to knead dough for the family bakery, while her mother Patricia mended dresses until her fingers ached. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and one child whose spirit seemed far too big for the narrow streets she grew up on. The story of Catherine's resilience didn't begin on a movie set. It began in a hospital. At just a few years old, she was rushed into emergency surgery after a severe viral infection closed her throat. Her parents watched helplessly as doctors performed a tracheotomy, slicing open their baby's neck to save her life. When it was over, the doctors told them she was lucky to be alive, but that faint scar under her chin would become her first reminder that survival leaves marks. She would later say that the scar made her both self-conscious and fiercely determined, a strange mixture that would follow her for life. I learned early that beauty fades, but fight doesn't, she once admitted. And that quiet fight became the rhythm of her childhood. Despite their modest life, the Zeta-Jones family carried a kind of stubborn optimism. When Catherine was just a child, fate smiled. Her parents won £100,000 in the national lottery, a miracle in working-class Wales. But instead of wasting it on indulgence, they invested it in her. New dance shoes, vocal lessons, stage coaching, the kind of opportunities few kids from Swansea could even dream of. Her father said, "We didn't buy things, we bought her future," and Catherine repaid every ounce of faith. At 4, she was already performing in local church halls. By 11, she was on stage in Annie. By 13, she'd taken the West End by storm in Bugsy Malone. There was no plan B, no safety net, only a family's faith and a young girl's unshakable drive. Her childhood became a blur of rehearsals and train rides, little Catherine in tap shoes, half asleep on her mother's lap after long nights on stage. While other girls spent afternoons gossiping, she memorized lines. While others dreamed, she was already living inside one. Yet for all the applause, there was loneliness. She later confessed, "I grew up in dressing rooms. I didn't have friends my age, I had mirrors." At 14, she auditioned for The Pajama Game, directed by Mickey Dolenz of The Monkees. She didn't just get the role, she owned it. That performance changed everything. The next year, she made the decision that would define her life. She dropped out of school to become a full-time performer. Her parents were terrified, but Catherine's conviction was absolute. There was no plan B, she said years later. I wasn't fearless. I was desperate. That desperation was her compass. The applause became her oxygen, and the scar beneath her chin, the one the cameras would one day never show, pulsed quietly as a reminder she'd been fighting to breathe since the beginning. Her teacher said she possessed the eyes of an old soul. Her mother said she carried storms inside her, even when she smiled. The truth was both. Catherine was magnetic, a contradiction of strength and fragility. She could command a stage and yet feel invisible when the lights dimmed. It's a paradox that would follow her into adulthood, shaping both her art and her pain. When she wasn't rehearsing, she'd watch old Hollywood films on VHS, Audrey Hepburn, Elizabeth Taylor, Grace Kelly, not as idols, but as blueprints. She didn't want to imitate them. She wanted to replace them. She once told an interviewer, "I didn't just want to act. I wanted to belong to the world they came from." That dream came with a cost. Childhood joy was traded for perfection. Every misstep was a lesson, every compliment a pressure. She learned to smile, even when she wanted to cry, a skill that would later become her armor. Because in the years ahead, Catherine wouldn't just play roles. She would live them: woman lover, mother survivor, each one layered with the echoes of that little girl who danced through pain. When asked decades later about that scar, she didn't hide it. She touched her neck lightly and said, "It's where I learned that life cuts you, but it also saves you." That's where the story truly begins, with a child who should have died, but instead chose to perform. Because the girl who once fought to breathe would one day teach the world how to survive. By the time Catherine Zeta-Jones turned 15, she had already lived what most actors would call an entire career. But for her, the curtain was only rising. The child from Swansea who once fought for breath now faced the larger, crueler storm of show business, a world that devours the gifted and forgets them just as fast. At 14, her name began circulating among casting agents after her electric performance in The Pajama Game. People whispered, "There's something about that girl. She doesn't just act, she burns." But talent, as Catherine would soon learn, doesn't guarantee safety. It guarantees exposure. She left school that same year, a decision most adults would call reckless, but Catherine called necessary. There was no fallback plan, no university, no quiet life waiting, just a dream that felt bigger than reason. She spent her teenage years living out of a suitcase, chasing auditions, surviving on adrenaline and ambition. "People thought I was fearless," she later said, "but really I was terrified. Fear just never stopped me. The early years weren't glamorous." She took every role she could, some brilliant, some humiliating. In 1990, she landed her first film, Les 1001 Nuits, 101 Nights, a French production that was supposed to launch her to international fame. Instead, it nearly ended her career. The film flopped catastrophically, selling fewer than 140 tickets in France and sinking without a trace. Critics ignored her. Casting directors stopped calling. For the first time, the girl who'd conquered London stages felt invisible. When she returned to England, it wasn't as a prodigy, it was as a survivor. She auditioned relentlessly, and then came a glimmer of grace. In 1991, she landed the role of Mariette Larkin in The Darling Buds of May. The show became a national phenomenon, and Catherine, radiant, earthy, effortlessly magnetic, became Britain's sweetheart overnight. For 2 years, the country couldn't get enough of her. Posters, interviews, fan mail by the thousands. She had finally arrived, or so she thought. Success, though, can be a curse disguised as applause. The show that made her a household name also trapped her. Casting directors began to see her as just another pretty face, charming, yes, but replaceable. She was desperate to prove otherwise. So she took whatever work came her way, small TV roles, forgettable films, endless auditions that ended with the same polite dismissal. We're looking for something different. Her next break came not from talent scouts, but from persistence. In 1995, she appeared in the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles and the mini-series Titanic performances that caught the eye of one man who would change everything: Steven Spielberg. Some say it was her quiet intensity that intrigued him. Others claim it was her resilience. Whatever it was, Spielberg made a call that would alter her fate. He recommended her to director Martin Campbell, who was casting The Mask of Zorro. At first, she was never meant to be the lead. Hollywood already had names: Penelope Cruz, Shakira, Salma Hayek. But when Catherine walked into that room, something shifted. She didn't audition. She commanded. Her sword training began immediately. She bruised, bled, and refused to stop. "I didn't want to be the pretty face next to Antonio," she said. "I wanted to earn the fight," and she did. When The Mask of Zorro premiered in 1998, it didn't just make money, it made history. $250 million at the box office. Critics raved. Audiences were spellbound. Catherine Zeta-Jones was no longer just another British actress. She was Hollywood's newest obsession, a fusion of grace and danger, vintage allure, and modern fire. Yet, even at the height of her breakthrough, she was haunted by a quiet fear. What if it all disappears? The same insecurity that had pushed her to excellence now began to erode her peace. Fame felt fragile, a mirror that could shatter at any second. She threw herself into work to keep the anxiety at bay. Entrapment 99 with Sean Connery, Traffic 2000, and then Chicago 2002. Each role heavier, darker, more demanding. By the time she played Velma Kelly in Chicago, Catherine was pregnant with her daughter. She danced through morning sickness, sang through fatigue, and delivered a performance that burned into the collective memory of cinema. 10 days before giving birth, she won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress Gold in one hand, life in the other. "I carried more than a child that night," she said later. "I carried every rejection, every bruise, every doubt that ever told me I wasn't enough." The cameras saw glamour, but behind that glow was a woman running on empty building walls around wounds no one else could see. Even now, those who knew her then say there was always something bittersweet about her success, a kind of melancholy in her laughter, a flicker of exhaustion behind every radiant smile. She had climbed the mountain, yes, but the air at the top was thin. The applause grew louder, but so did the loneliness. In the stillness between roles, Catherine began to feel the weight of her own life pressing in the isolation, the scrutiny, the emotional vertigo of fame. What began as a dream had become a kind of gilded confinement, and soon life would hand her a love story so perfect it seemed written by destiny, one that would elevate her to Hollywood royalty and nearly destroy her from within, because the girl who once fought to breathe was about to learn that love can heal and also break in ways no scar ever could. When Catherine Zeta-Jones stepped into the role of Elena Montero in The Mask of Zorro, 1998, Hollywood collectively gasped. It wasn't just a performance, it was a resurrection of something audiences thought they'd lost. For years, the silver screen had been missing that brand of glamour that belonged to the legends: Grace Kelly, Ava Gardner, Elizabeth Taylor. Catherine brought it back with a vengeance. She wasn't trying to be them. She was the modern echo, the living reminder that elegance could be powerful, that femininity could wield a sword. Antonio Banderas once said, when she walked into the room, the temperature changed. You didn't look at her, you felt her. The film's success turned her life upside down. One moment she was an actress fighting for relevance. The next she was the face of Hollywood reborn. Magazines hailed her as the crown jewel of a new golden age. But with fame came the curse of constant exposure. The photographers, the gossip, the microscope trained on every move she made. In 1999, she starred alongside Sean Connery in Entrapment, a film that would immortalize one single image, Catherine weaving through a web of red laser beams in black silk, a sequence that became a cultural fever dream. Critics called it a ballet of seduction and danger. To the world, she was untouchable. To Catherine, she was beginning to disappear. But she didn't slow down. Her next role in Traffic 2000 stripped away the glamour. As the wife of a drug lord, she gave a performance raw enough to make the world see past her beauty, a woman capable of rage, fear, and transformation. The performance earned her a Golden Globe nomination and her first Screen Actors Guild Award. It also marked the first time she realized that being beautiful could be both an asset and a prison. Then came Chicago 2002, the defining moment. Pregnant, exhausted, and under relentless pressure, Catherine turned Velma Kelly into a cinematic storm, all sharp edges and aching humanity. Her voice slashed through every song, her movements defied gravity, her presence dominated the screen. The film swept the Academy Awards, and when Catherine stood on that stage holding her Oscar, her baby due, any moment she wasn't just a winner, she was an icon of endurance. "I carried more than a child that night," she said later. "I carried every role that broke me and every one that saved me." It was poetic, a woman once gasping for air as a child now standing before the world, commanding every breath in the room. Yet behind the golden glow was the beginning of a silent unraveling. The pressure to stay perfect was unbearable. Every red carpet appearance came with whispered speculation, her looks, her marriage, her body, her worth. The applause that once lifted her now echoed like a demand, "Be flawless, stay flawless." The more she succeeded, the lonelier she felt. Fame became a hall of mirrors where every reflection was distorted. Even as she appeared in critically acclaimed films like Intolerable Cruelty 2003 and Ocean's 12 2004, she confessed privately to friends that she felt like a stranger in her own skin. The tabloids had found their new obsession, not Catherine the actress, but Catherine the spectacle. Her relationship with Michael Douglas, 25 years her senior, was treated like theater. Their love story, too, Oscar winners, same birthday, different worlds, became headline currency. She was labeled the fairy tale bride, but every fairy tale, as Catherine knew, carries its curse. Behind closed doors, the reality was far more human. Sleepless nights, whispered doubts, the constant balancing act between career and family. The cameras saw the gowns and diamonds. They didn't see the woman quietly checking her pulse in the mirror, wondering if she still belonged in the life she had built. Michael once said, "She's the strongest person I've ever met. She carries the weight of 3 lives at once and somehow makes it look easy." It wasn't easy. It was endurance disguised as grace. In interviews, Catherine played the part she was expected to: witty, elegant, composed. But the cracks had already begun to show. The very perfection that made her adored was slowly consuming her. Still, her artistry only deepened. She began choosing roles not for glamour, but for truth. In The Terminal 2004, she played a woman trapped between worlds, a metaphor she didn't need to research. Later, in No Reservations 2007, she portrayed a chef haunted by control anxiety and the fear of failure, an echo of her own struggles behind the spotlight. For audiences, Catherine Zeta-Jones was unstoppable. For Catherine, the woman beneath the legend, the walls were closing in. The very spotlight that had crowned her was now burning her from the inside. The world saw her as flawless. Catherine saw herself as fracturing. She would later say, "The hardest part about success is surviving it." And in the years that followed, she would learn that success, real success, doesn't mean winning trophies or applause. It means staying alive when the applause fades, because behind every photograph of her triumph lay a truth more haunting than any role she'd ever played. The woman who once conquered the stage was about to confront the one battle she couldn't rehearse, the quiet collapse behind the curtains. The headlines called her life a Hollywood fairy tale, but fairy tales are written by those who never lived them. Behind the silk gowns and perfect smiles, Catherine Zeta-Jones was unraveling in silence. The woman who once ruled the stage with thunderous poise now found herself trembling under the quiet weight of her own success. After the birth of her daughter Caris in 2003, Catherine and Michael Douglas withdrew from the glare of Los Angeles and moved to Bermuda, a place they hoped would be paradise. Blue skies, ocean breeze, laughter, echoing through their private villa. To the world, it was the picture of peace, but inside those turquoise walls, Catherine's storms were just beginning. The stillness of the island, instead of soothing her, became an echo chamber for anxiety. The endless calm pressed against her mind like a suffocating silence. She began waking at dawn with no reason, her pulse racing, her body heavy, her thoughts scattered. She smiled for her children, smiled for interviews, smiled for premieres, until her face ached from pretending. She once said, "I could walk a red carpet and feel like I was watching someone else live my life." It wasn't vanity or exhaustion. It was illness, invisible but consuming. For years she battled the creeping darkness alone, afraid of what the world would say. In 2011, the diagnosis came quietly: bipolar II disorder, a condition marked by deep depressive episodes and bursts of restless energy that left her hollow and drained. But Catherine kept it secret. Mental illness in Hollywood was taboo, a whispered flaw that could shatter careers. She feared the pity more than the pain. "You can recover from a broken bone," she said, "but how do you recover from judgment?" Meanwhile, life struck blow after blow. Michael's eldest son, Cameron, was arrested for drug trafficking in 2009 and sentenced to prison. The headlines were merciless. Catherine, already fragile, found herself holding a family together while it splintered under public scrutiny. Then came the next strike: Michael's diagnosis. Stage 4, throat cancer. Catherine became both wife and nurse, watching her husband shrink beneath hospital lights, tubes, and chemotherapy scars. Friends say she rarely slept, spending nights by his bedside, whispering prayers to machines that hummed like broken lullabies. And then in 2010, the unthinkable: during an interview, Michael casually mentioned that his cancer might have been caused by HPV, a sexually transmitted virus. The media exploded. Overnight, Catherine's name was dragged into the ugliest corners of tabloid speculation. She had done nothing wrong, yet the world looked at her differently. A friend recalled, "She felt stripped, humiliated, like her marriage, her dignity, her identity had been auctioned off." That was the moment something inside her broke. The whispers were louder than her laughter, the lies heavier than truth. The woman who had once embodied control and composure began to crack under invisible weight. She checked herself quietly into a treatment facility in Connecticut. No cameras, no announcement, just a desperate need to stop falling. When the news leaked, the world expected denial. Instead, Catherine stood tall and spoke. "This is a disorder that affects millions of people. I'm not ashamed. Mental health is not something to hide." That single sentence changed everything. For years, people had admired her beauty. Now they admired her courage. Overnight, she became the unlikeliest of advocates, the woman who made it safe to not be okay. Fans wrote letters by the thousands. Other actors began to speak out. The silence surrounding mental illness in Hollywood cracked open, and light poured through. Yet recovery is never a straight line. By 2013, her marriage, already battered by illness and distance, began to crumble. She and Michael quietly separated. The tabloids screamed of infidelity, betrayal, breakdowns. None of it was true. "We needed space to heal," she said simply. "Both of us were broken in different ways." 8 months later, they reconciled. No press conference, no headlines, just two hands finding each other in the dark. That silent reunion was perhaps her bravest act. Love without spectacle, forgiveness without applause. Still, the world wouldn't leave them alone. In 2018, new accusations surfaced against Michael during the height of the Me Too movement. Once again, Catherine was forced into the spotlight. She'd begged to escape. She stood by him publicly, but privately, the scars deepened. "I didn't sign up for perfect," she told Vanity Fair. I signed up for love, and love means you stay when it's ugly. By the time the storm cleared, Catherine was 50 and tired. The years of smiling through pain, of balancing glamour with grief, had taken their toll. Yet out of the wreckage rose something remarkable clarity. She began speaking more openly about her journey, not as confession, but as connection. We talk about cancer openly, she said. We talk about heart disease. Why not mental illness? Her courage transformed stigma into solidarity. Her story became a lifeline for strangers who saw themselves in her fragility. Sometimes she told a crowd at a charity gala, "Strength doesn't roar. It whispers, keep going." That's the strange thing about tragedy. It strips away illusions, leaving only truth. And Catherine's truth was this: beneath the beauty and success lived a woman who refused to break even when breaking would have been easier. The applause that once defined her no longer mattered. What mattered was breath, stillness, peace, the same thing she fought for as a toddler in that Welsh hospital room decades ago. Because in the end, the battle wasn't for fame. It was for freedom, the kind that lives quietly inside a healed heart. And as the world watched her return, luminous and unshaken, no one realized the next chapter of her story would be her most human one yet. After weathering the storms of fame, illness, and heartbreak, Catherine Zeta-Jones stepped into her 50s, not as a fallen star, but as a survivor, learning how to live again. The world that once defined her through red carpets and headlines now saw a woman who had traded perfection for peace. She and Michael Douglas, both wiser and more tempered by time, found their rhythm again. "We're not the same people we were 20 years ago," she said softly in a 2020 interview. "But that's the beauty of love. It changes shape, and you either grow with it or let it go." They chose to grow. Their life today unfolds between continents and quiet sanctuaries. In Spain, the couple owns a $33 million estate in Mallorca, a sun-drenched haven overlooking the sea, surrounded by olive groves and 400-year-old stone walls. Catherine calls it her healing place. She walks barefoot through its courtyards at sunrise, drinks her coffee under lemon trees, and tends to the garden herself. "I feel closer to who I really am there," she once said, "closer to the earth, closer to stillness." In New York, they share an elegant apartment overlooking Central Park, a far cry from the chaos of Hollywood. The days are slower now. She cooks, reads, listens to jazz. When the world shuts off its cameras, Catherine Zeta-Jones becomes just Catherine, a wife, a mother, a woman who survived the noise. Her children Dylan and Karis are now grown, carving out their own lives. Dylan studies film, Karis fashion. Their relationship with their mother is one of quiet reverence, a blend of admiration and awe. In 2021, a photo of Catherine and Karis side by side went viral. The resemblance was haunting, same jawline, same fire in the eyes. It wasn't just beauty passed down, it was strength. Still, life hasn't been without its shadows. Her battle with bipolar disorder remains a lifelong companion rather than an enemy. She follows a disciplined wellness routine, yoga at dawn, meditation, clean eating, breathing exercises, and time away from screens. "It's not about chasing youth anymore," she said. "It's about honoring survival." Catherine has also redefined her career on her own terms. She no longer chases every role, she chooses them. In 2022, she stunned audiences in Netflix's Wednesday as Morticia Addams, elegant, eerie, and timeless. It was a perfect mirror of who she's become, darkly luminous, self-assured, and untouched by trend. Critics called her performance a masterclass in reinvention. Beyond acting, she has quietly built a second empire, Casa Zeta-Jones, her lifestyle brand. From luxury bedding to fragrance, she's transformed her love for art and design into a statement of independence. "I've spent a lifetime becoming other people," she said. "Now I just want to build something that feels like me." Her business ventures and endorsements have made her one of the wealthiest actresses of her generation, with an estimated net worth of $150 million. Yet, when asked about her success, she doesn't talk about money or awards. A beautiful home is only beautiful if it holds peace, she told Architectural Digest. The once unrelenting ambition that drove her is now tempered by gratitude. She supports mental health charities funds, scholarships for young Welsh actors, and quietly donates to cancer research causes written in her scars. In interviews, there's a shift in her voice, slower, softer, but steadier. I used to think happiness was applause, she admitted. Now, I think it's being able to wake up without dread. That's my Oscar. Sometimes the paparazzi still catch glimpses of her barefoot on her balcony robe, fluttering in the morning light, sipping coffee as the sun kisses her face. No diamonds, no performance, just peace. Those photos go viral. For one reason, they're real. Because for once, the world isn't seeing Catherine the star. They're seeing Catherine the survivor. The world that once celebrated her beauty now honors her resilience. And perhaps that's the most beautiful transformation of all. Because the woman who once fought for breath now breathes freely, not for the cameras, but for herself. Catherine Zeta-Jones's story is no longer just about fame. It's about what fame costs and what truth can rebuild. Her name, once whispered with awe, for her beauty, is now spoken with respect for her resilience. Few actresses have lived so many lives within one lifetime, and even fewer have emerged from the wreckage with their light intact. Her legacy is woven through contrasts, glamour and grit, fragility, and fire, grace and defiance. She is both the woman who embodied classic Hollywood elegance and the one who stripped that illusion bare by speaking about mental health in an industry built on masks. In doing so, she transformed pain into permission for others to stop pretending. When Catherine publicly revealed her diagnosis of bipolar II disorder, the reaction was seismic. For decades, Hollywood had buried such conversations beneath designer gowns and carefully managed smiles. But Catherine broke that silence with the same poise she once carried across the Oscar stage. "We talk about cancer and heart disease openly," she said. "Why not mental illness?" Those words rippled far beyond red carpets. They reached homes, hospital wards, and hearts that had felt unseen. The effect was generational. Younger artists began citing her as a turning point, the moment when vulnerability became strength. She didn't ask for pity, she demanded understanding. That honesty reframed celebrity itself. The audience no longer saw her as untouchable, they saw her as human. And yet, her cultural footprint extends beyond courage. Catherine's artistry reignited an appreciation for the kind of timeless allure Hollywood had nearly forgotten. In an age obsessed with youth, she brought back presence, that rare magnetic stillness that commands a room without a single word. Her performances in The Mask of Zorro, Chicago, and Traffic are now studied for their precision, not just beauty, but mastery. Every glance, every pause, every breath carries purpose. Even her choices off-screen have reshaped the image of stardom. She refuses to let age dictate relevance. When she appeared as Morticia Addams in Netflix's Wednesday, she did more than play a role. She reminded the world that elegance doesn't expire, it evolves. The series reached a new generation who had never seen Chicago or Zorro, yet suddenly found themselves enchanted by her all over again. Fashion houses, too, have turned her into an emblem of ageless sophistication. Unlike many of her peers, Catherine's beauty isn't frozen in time. It breathes with it. She embraces the lines, the maturity, the evidence of life lived fully. "I've earned every year," she once said, "and I intend to wear them beautifully." Philanthropically, she's remained quietly devoted to causes close to her heart, particularly those tied to Wales, her homeland. She funds scholarships for aspiring performers and frequently visits local arts programs, often anonymously, to watch young actors find their footing on the same kinds of stages where she began. "It's not about giving back," she told a journalist. "It's about staying connected to the place that made me." But perhaps her most enduring impact lies in how she redefined the narrative of female survival in Hollywood. For too long, the industry had celebrated women for how well they concealed their pain. Catherine did the opposite. She turned hers into a conversation. By doing so, she changed what it meant to be powerful. Her legacy isn't measured in trophies, though she has plenty. It's in the quiet revolution she sparked, proof that grace doesn't mean silence, that beauty can coexist with brokenness, and that healing can be both private and public at once. Today, when people speak her name, it's with a different tone, not just admiration, but gratitude. Because in watching her endure, many found the courage to face their own invisible wars. In the end, Catherine Zeta-Jones's cultural impact isn't just cinematic, it's spiritual. She showed that survival, when met with honesty, can be a work of art. And even when the lights fade, her story will keep glowing, not as a fairy tale, but as a testament to what it truly means to rise. When we look back on Catherine Zeta-Jones's life, it's tempting to summarize it as a triumph, beauty, fame, wealth, awards. But to do that would be to miss the essence of her story. Catherine's journey was never about perfection. It was about endurance. It was about what happens after the applause fades and the world stops watching. She has lived through extremes that would have crushed most people: public ridicule, invasive gossip, mental illness, and the endless unspoken demand that a woman in Hollywood must stay flawless no matter how much she's breaking inside. And yet, through every fall, she has chosen grace, not the kind found in glamour, but the kind forged in grit. Catherine's strength lies in her willingness to be seen as human. She didn't turn her illness into a spectacle, she turned it into a statement. She said what many could not, that healing is not linear, that love can survive fracture, and that silence, the dangerous kind, must be broken. She didn't just protect her dignity, she expanded the world's understanding of what dignity looks like. There's a quiet heroism in the way she carries herself now. You don't sense the need to prove anything anymore. The woman who once fought to be noticed has become one who doesn't need to be. Her power is no longer in her presence, but in her peace. And perhaps that's what makes Catherine Zeta-Jones one of the most compelling figures of her generation. She is both the symbol and the survivor, the reminder that fame cannot shield you from suffering, and that true beauty is found in the way you rise from it. At Celebrity Forgotten, we don't see Catherine as a fallen star. We see her as something rarer, a woman who transformed pain into purpose. Her story isn't tragic because of what she endured. It's powerful because of what she became. She once said, "You can buy luxury, but you can't buy peace." That line, perhaps more than any performance, defines her legacy. And for everyone who's ever felt their strength slipping, her life whispers a quiet truth. You don't have to shine all the time. You just have to keep going. Because Catherine did, through illness, judgment, and the hollow echo of fame, and she emerged, not untouched, but real. So when people ask, what happened to Catherine Zeta-Jones? The answer isn't tragedy. It's transformation. She didn't fade away. She evolved. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us, that surviving your story is the most cinematic act of all. But before we close her chapter, there's still one haunting truth left, one final reflection that lingers long after the lights dim. There's a certain silence that follows the applause, the kind only those who've lived long enough in the spotlight can understand. For Catherine Zeta-Jones, that silence has become her sanctuary. No more chasing, no more proving, no more pretending to be invincible. Just the rhythm of a quieter life, the clink of coffee cups in a sunlit kitchen, the hum of old jazz records echoing through an empty hall, and the soft laughter of a woman who finally made peace with her reflection. If you saw her today barefoot on her balcony in Mallorca, morning breeze teasing her hair, face bare and free, you wouldn't see a Hollywood goddess. You'd see something rarer, a woman who has learned how to be. She no longer performs for the world. She exists for herself. There are still scars, of course, the one beneath her chin, the invisible ones left by heartbreak and illness. But they've become part of her story's architecture, like cracks in marble that make the statue more real. She once said, "The scar that saved me as a child reminds me that I've been fighting for breath since the day I was born. That truth now feels like the heartbeat of her entire life. In every decade, Catherine's story has been a mirror for ambition, for love, for loss, and for the quiet strength it takes to survive all three. She has been the ingenue, the icon, the mother, the wife, the woman who disappeared and found herself again. She's shown us that survival isn't always triumphant. Sometimes it's tender, sometimes it's messy, but it's always brave. The world may remember her for Chicago Zorro or that unforgettable red carpet glow, but maybe her greatest role has been the one she never auditioned for, the role of being human. Because behind every photo, every headline, every carefully constructed illusion of perfection, there was always a heart that kept beating quietly beneath the noise. And in that rhythm lies something profoundly familiar, the sound of someone who refuses to stop trying, even when no one's watching. Catherine Zeta-Jones doesn't belong to the past. She belongs to anyone who has ever felt broken, but kept moving anyway. Her story is not a tragedy. It's a requiem for resilience, a soft hymn for everyone who's ever had to start over after losing everything that once defined them. She once said, "I just want to be still." Maybe that's what true victory looks like. Not applause, but stillness. Not fame, but peace. The little girl who once fought for breath has finally found a life where she can breathe freely. Some stories were never meant to be known, but now, you know,